Hello, this is Dr. Garrett Castleberry, Associate Professor and Program Director of Communication, Media, and Ethics at Mid-America Christian University. I'm here with a digital lecture for comma 4413 Communication and Cultural Change. It's an introduction to television studies style course where we're studying a particular medium of mass communication in our comm media and ethics major. Thank you. And I'm taking student questions, your questions from the readings. Your weekly readings discussion questions assignment provides the raw materials with which we can have an asynchronous dialogue. And I'm very excited about that. I'm very excited to get into your questions, and I'm going to move ideally at a pace that will allow you to successfully complete the consumption of this while you're very busy taking in other types of texts, right? Some TV texts, the weekly screenings that we're studying, the items that you might be independently studying for your final written project. So without further delay, let's get to some of the questions. This batch of questions comes from week 2 of the assignment, and I want to start with a couple of questions from Rosalind, and we will work through the list here. All right. I may not have the texts at arm's length, but I'll work on retrieving those. I think I see them in the background back there. I'll work on retrieving those for future reference as necessary. But we're looking at basically Jason Mittell's Television and American Culture book, as well as Jason Mittell's Complex TV. And we, in addition, have a third text and then questions from some of the screenings. So, Rosalind writes, author Mittell in Television American Culture, chapter 4, paragraph 1 on page 133 writes, quote, even as network news ascended to become the central medium for Americans to engage in current events, the format was regularly critiqued for the limitations imposed by the nightly half-hour schedule, end quote. My question is, do you think without previous imposed limitations that there is an overabundance of time spent on the release of repetitive daytime and nightly news on regular channels and news networks? And I guess we could say, without question, cable media producers have capitalized on news in the literal sense. So they literally have capitalized on this idea of news as something that can be commoditized and create a profit. And so what we have seen is the pockets of public interest are just like any consumer group or product now, and they're starting to become more narrow focused. Hence we get this term in media, narrow casting. Arguably cable news, while it's casting a wide-ish net, they're narrow casting according to largely political beliefs, ideological beliefs, and I think that's where we've created this, bubble in the U.S. that has people in very polarized states, kind of looking at us versus them scenarios, when oftentimes it's the person right next door to you, it's the person down the hall in your apartment. We just happen to maybe have a pattern of voting differently, and maybe diverge on an ethical guideline here, maybe a moral belief there, and otherwise we're coexisting, socially and culturally. So I think that the public gets maybe invested too much in some of this news media, and there's a focus on getting started by, what we call agenda setting of both newsmakers and the kinds of stories that they kind of run with, because now we see cable news operating similarly to internet media, in that it's after, I'm going to use this term, right? This rich term it's part of internet language, clickbait, right? And so they need to use sensational headlines and talking points that essentially function as clickbait, or maybe the opposite of click. They don't want you to click the channel, that is to say, change it. A follow-up question: do you believe that the television news channels have lost the focus of their initial intent, especially in the area of politics? And here's where I would, let's slice it in half. Say, cable news, we talked about that already. Yes, we could make that case. Local news, not necessarily, although some are concerned with regional news stations getting bought up by larger media companies. That brings in a lot of questions regarding media ethics, regarding monopolies and how they operate. But overall, when I observe local news telecasts, not just in this state, in other states, I'm seeing coverage in that traditional journalistic sense. It's a far cry from that kind of opinion-focused outlook projected on cable, maybe by many mainstream websites. Author Mattel also writes an introduction of Complex TV, the Poetics of Contemporary Storytelling, in paragraph 1 on page 5, quote, "The focus of my analysis is understanding the way television tells stories, not the cultural impact or interpretation of those stories," end quote. My question is, although Mattel focuses on the way television tells stories and not the cultural impact or interpretation, do you think that one can address television storytelling without addressing its cultural impact? And I would that's a fair question on one hand, but on the other hand, let's just think about what Mattel's articulating here. Let's remember that a researcher's job is to minimize bias, all right, and stay as close to a given hypothesis or research question. What we could also understand is their driving thesis, all right? And this is a book-length work that we're exploring from Mattel. And so he is being clear and opaque about his intent, all right? He's being intentional, and he wants us to understand he's trying to stick to a certain focus area. And yeah, these intersections between narratives, their themes, cultural context, and so on, of course they're going to bleed over. But our goal, even when we think about our special project, our written assignment, we're trying to have a very narrow focus so that we can accomplish answering our own research question, our own point of analysis that we propose in the introduction itself. Follow-up question: I believe that the way television tells stories are told. I believe that the way television tells stories are told impacts our culture. Do you agree or disagree? It's closed-ended question. All mass media, by its nature, holds the potential to shape and influence culture. So would be my position there. Let's jump down, hit another question. All right, let's jump down to this section. Mattel writes on page 76, quote, "In large part, the use of flashbacks in the pilots is an expository, providing backstory on the character situations that precede the present day timeline. In my opinion, in times past, series such as The Twilight Zone used a brief intro by Rod Serling, and other sitcoms used catchy songs as an introduction to each segment, which provided a backstory on the characters and situations that preceded the series." My question is, do you think that using these methods as templates would be just as effective today? I'm not sure what you mean by these methods. Who says they aren't effective today? Though, could be my follow-up question to this. And on the topic of intro credits, and maybe in context of television history, something did spark for me, and that is that introduction, like title credit scenes, these still create or establish a mood, a sense of what the text is or what it's going to be about, who these characters are. but it's the style of the execution that's changed over time. All right, so you maybe sitcoms in the 70s, you have these cheesy montages and like characters doing their different things, like walk-ins, and just a way to share that production information. But you think about today, especially these more expensive shows, they're trying to create mood, right? Tone. The title credit sequences are almost like a trailer, a teaser, this sort of establishing the motif of the series, rather than rather than focusing on purely introducing some basic information that could be outside of the narrative. Okay. Let's take a couple of questions from Kimberly. First, looking at the 70s, the CNN CNN co-produced documentary series from Playtone Studios, episode 1, Television Gets Real. The first commentary was looking back at on All in the Family. I can't believe how controversial it was, and that they were even allowed to air the show. Even President Nixon objected. This is a classic scenario, right? Nixon was kind of he was that template for something we see now today, right? Where he's representing some segment in his position, and so his authority to critique something builds maybe the momentum against that thing. I understand freedom of speech, but how is that okay? How do we go from Jed Clampett to Archie Bunker? And how did one person, Norman Lear, completely change the face of television? And obviously, this episode explains this for us, right? So it's a nice recap of the episode 1 of the 70s, and encourage everyone to check that out. Really well done series. But yeah, the country was moving forward. I think series in the 70s were reflective of the political tensions, the social and cultural tensions we went throughout the 1960s to get to that point where culture shifted, where culture changed in the 70s. And so you're either going to see media leading the way or media reflecting, right? And that's that duality between media and the public, or artists and the art they create versus the society in which they're created in. Same question when reading All in the Family from the Inner Circle. The FCC even tried to fight it, as well as President of the United States. So, but let's think of it this way: by bringing the topic up, right? So topics of race, topics of class division, so on, in the All in the Family episode that you potentially watched, even in a fictional setting, it would force society, it being the show, the writers, Norman Lear and company, the performers, it would, by bringing the topic up, a topic such as racism in America, in a fictional setting, it forces society to reflect on it, right? Or reflect on the issues that were not necessarily being pushed forward socially or culturally on the public stage, right? So maybe people are making strides in private circles, community groups, right? Maybe in church settings, maybe not. Maybe in schools, maybe not. Maybe among politicians, maybe not. But television was this new tool that was bringing people together like never before, and its stories were impacting us in that way. Okay, let's take a quick break, reset, grab a swig of water, whatever, run to the restroom, and we'll come back, segment 2 of our asynchronous dialogue concerning your questions on television.